Hello, bonjour, and oki to everyone, and welcome to Nonprofits at 2. I'm Karen Ball, President and CEO of CCVO. 751 unmarked graves of children at the Coassus First Nation today. This is a crime scene, and it's perpetuated by our own government's Indian Act and by institutions that are very much a part of our nonprofit and charitable sector today. I acknowledge the land where we call home, the traditional Treaty 7 territory, home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina and Nakota nations, and Métis Nation Region 3. This land acknowledgement is such a small step in building understanding and reconciliation, and today it seems so very, very small. At CCVO, we have much of our own work to do, and we are committed to our personal continuous learning journeys, to opening our eyes, minds, and hearts to the truths that are evident, to recognize the trauma inflicted by settlers and colonial systems upon Indigenous children, families, and communities that continues today, and to take deliberate action towards reconciliation. I will be reading the Calgary Indigenous Human Rights Circle report, Combating Discrimination and Racism Against Indigenous Peoples in Calgary by Help Seekers Monique Fry, and thank you, Marissa Barber, for bringing the report to my attention. In reading it, I will be thinking about how I and CCVO can be a positive force in helping to address the racism that exists in our city. Today's gathering is presented by our partner, ATB Financial. This series is supported by the Muttart Foundation, PwC Canada, and our media partner, Postmedia, as well as our friends at Fort Calgary. Our core supporters make it possible for CCVO to strengthen our nonprofit networks and advocate for the needs of our sector every day. During the session, you'll be able to submit questions for the mayor through the chat by directing them to Ask Questions here. You may also use the chat for any technical issues that you may be experiencing. At the end of the event, we'll also have a chance to answer a few short questions about your experience, and we hope you'll take the time to do that so that we can make sure Nonprofits at 2 remains relevant and responsive to your interests and needs. And now on to the main event. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and our mayor, Naomi Nenshi. I understand that Mayor Nenshi is driving right now on his way to getting somewhere where he can participate fully in the conversation, but we will be looping him into audio as we go. But I will say he's a man really that requires no introduction. But I do want to take a second, since we have him on mute, I can take the floor a tiny bit to remark on how fortunate Calgary has been to have someone so deeply compassionate, community-centered, and knowledgeable about the nonprofit sector at its helm for over the past dozen years. Many great initiatives have been moved forward during this time. I mean, way too many to mention, but I just want to touch on a few. A commitment to poverty reduction strategy, Enough for All, a sliding scale for a low-income transit pass, a long-fought battle for secondary suites, and the opening of some of North America's most impressive recreational and cultural facilities, as well as the recent adoption of a leading mental health strategy. Thank you, Mayor Nenshi, for working so hard in fact, that during the flood, Nap for Nenshi was trending, for showing up to every pancake breakfast, especially on those where the years of Stampede and Ramadan overlapped, for being a loyal fan for Calgary's arts and culture, and for being a constant champion for the nonprofit sector and the communities that we all serve. And finally, thank you for joining us today from the road and eventually in person. Joining us now and on the screen today as a moderator for today's conversation is Naomi Grattan, President and CEO of Fort Calgary. If we were meeting in person today, we would be gathered at Fort Calgary, and I am so looking forward to the opportunity to gathering there safely in the future. Naomi is smart, politically engaged, strategic, and a lover of museums, and I think the perfect person to lead Fort Calgary into its future. She's worked with the National Music Centre, Canadian Museums Association, the National Gallery, and the International Centre for Museum Conservation in Rome, to name a few. She has an MA in museum leadership and teaches museum management at the post-secondary level. Welcome, Naomi and Mayor Nenshi, and I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Karen.
Maybe I'll just jump in for a moment before we go to Naomi and just say thank you, Karen, for that incredibly generous introduction. I'm a bit teared up, which is not great because, as you heard, I'm on the road. Today was my niece's high school graduation by Zoom, of course, and I had to wait for the ends to cross the stage anyway. Point being, everything's a little backed up today, but I will be on camera with you shortly, and I do apologize for that. But I just wanted to say that I'm really, really appreciative of the opportunity to be with you today. If you may recall, you may or may not, that one of the very first events that was canceled for me in March 2020 during COVID was what I call my nonprofit bear pit, where I come in and let you ask me anything. And I'm glad we've got it back online. So I really am available to answer any questions, no matter how tough. But before I turn it over to Naomi, I'll just be a bit maudlin for a minute and just say, as you know, I come from the nonprofit sector, and I've been a thorn in many of your sides for many years, trying to make our sector work better and serve people even better than we already do. And it has been just a humbling honor for me to be able to bring a little bit of the sector into the mayor's office these last 11 years and hopefully work on a lot of the things you are working on to make life better every day for everyone. But Naomi, I completely cut you off as I do, so I will stop there and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mayor Nenshi, and thanks, Karen. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. There are many questions to ask someone like you who's been at this job for so long. So I think what we wanted to talk about a little bit today is about your reflections on your time as mayor. What have you learned about Calgary in your time as mayor? Oh, did we lose him?
There we go. Our first technical problem of the day. I made it to the at my house. I couldn't unmute myself, but now I am unmuted. You can hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Thanks so much for that question. And ultimately, it has been a journey, I think, of learning for all of us over the last 11 years. And I should have started really by acknowledging what Karen acknowledged so beautifully, which is the moment we're in history. And maybe I'll back up a little bit. It's always dangerous to make judgments about history while you're living it. But I actually believe that we are in a moment right now of great pivot. And my old professor, Ron Glassberg at the University of Calgary, I really do need to send him an email and ask him if I'm saying it correctly, because it's been a lot of years. But I remember him talking about the cyclical nature of time. And he used to talk about how times of great tension or torpor, where it wasn't clear where society was going, could be followed by times of great transcendence. And I really hope that that's where we are now. Because over the last year, we have been dealing, I would say, with 5 simultaneous crises. Public health crisis, of course. A mental health and addictions crisis. Been here for a long time, but it's been exacerbated by the public health crisis. A deep economic crisis, and an economic crisis that in particular, especially in this recession, is hitting the vulnerable, as are the mental health and public health crises. The fourth one, of course, is an environmental crisis and contending with the reality of climate change and what that means to us in our communities. And the fifth one is a real reckoning on the issue of equity, on how we reconcile ourselves from being a place that we are proud of, a place where we believe in diversity and pluralism and multiculturalism, where a guy who looks like me from a family like mine can be the mayor. And so we're proud of that, and we should be proud of that. It's not very many places in the world. In fact, there aren't any places in the world that have accomplished what we have accomplished. But at the same time, we're coming to a real reckoning here that it's not enough, that we have to move from being a place that strives to be not racist to a place that is truly anti-racist. And we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what that journey will bring, but we know we have to do it. We know we have to be in a place where everyone, and particularly our Indigenous brothers and sisters, but everyone, Black people, people of color, LGBTQ folks, everyone can live that life of dignity and opportunity and prosperity. And so for me, to get to your question about the biggest learnings, I mean, there's been so many of them. But, you know, we live in a city of I always say 1.4 million people and 1.9 million opinions about things. And people experience life differently in our community. And for me, I always thought that, you know, my story growing up in Northeast Calgary, going to school, becoming successful in my career was actually a pretty common story. It may be extraordinary in its details, you know, becoming the mayor, but ultimately a very Canadian story. And one of the things that I've really learned is that that just doesn't happen by accident. It happens because many, many people throughout our community fight to make it happen, to make sure that every night growing up in every neighborhood has the opportunity to be able to live that life of dignity and success. And it takes a lot of work. And so I've been blessed, you know, over the last 11 years to meet people in every neighborhood in the city. I really do think I've met people in every neighborhood in the city and talk to them about their lives, what works and what doesn't work, and how the community can work better for them. And so for me, that's been the ongoing work of learning, and I think really important work.
Thanks, Mayor Nenshi. Yeah, I think some of what you, I mean, a lot of what you said really resonated for me, but I think the most important thing is that how we actively work together to create a place where people live in dignity, live, you know, and are accepted and loved and able to do the things they wish to do as they are in the world. I think that's the most important thing we can achieve as a community. So in the context of these crises that you listed off, the you know, public health, economic crisis, mental health, of course, the environment, climate change, and then the reckoning that we're facing with equity. Those are, of course, are all of the kinds of challenges that our nonprofit sector works tirelessly to address all of the time. What would be your, if the nonprofit sector, and it feels unfair to talk about it as a whole because it's so different and there are so many different kinds of agencies working in it, but if you were to sort of speak to the nonprofit sector in the context of these crises, if the sector was to do something radically different or to change the way it does things or seek a different path, what's sort of the thing that you would suggest that the sector does differently in the context of these many and related crises?
Great question. And you know, let me start by blowing a bit of smoke, but it's actually very sincerely blown, which is we would not have been able to survive any of this without the sector, without smart women and men doing the work that they do every day to make our communities work better. That's critical. It matters. And I'm really deeply, deeply grateful for it. But at the same time, even when I was an academic and even now as the mayor, you know, I have a common theme. And that theme is, I always say, I'm not a very bright person. I only have two answers to every single, and they're the same.
Boy. We've lost him again. Hopefully he comes back soon. while we're waiting for Mayor Nenshi to sort out his technical glitch, if you have any questions or you're thinking of questions you'd like to ask the mayor, please remember you can pop them into the chat, and the team at CCVO is organizing them and so that we can put them forward. So please do put your questions into the chat. Make them tough questions. The question is, the other tough question we have, of course, is the mayor back? Oh, we lost him.
I think he's back now.
I am back. And the good news is I made it home. And as soon as I turned on my camera, I lost the whole meeting. So what I was trying to say, I'm just going to turn my camera off again as I transition onto my desk here. But what I was trying to say when I got cut off so terribly rudely by Zoom is I'm just blaming Zoom, not my own incompetence here. I was blowing a bit of smoke and saying, listen, we are incredibly fortunate to have the nonprofit sector that we have in the city. We are incredibly fortunate to have the women and men who do the work every single day. Because without them, we wouldn't be able to be here. And ultimately, I'm really proud of what we accomplish every day, whether it's in the arts, in faith communities, in anti-poverty, or in anti-racism. But if you've ever heard me opine, you will know that I always say I'm not very smart because I only have two solutions to every problem. And they're always the same solutions. And it is always take a systems-wide view. Always look at the whole system of how people are navigating their ways in life. And always put the person at the center. Too often in the public sector and in the nonprofit sector, we find ourselves serving the process or serving the bureaucracy or serving the way it's always been. And we often have to, it's a habit and it's a rigor for us to remind ourselves that we have to serve the citizen, that we have to serve the citizen's journey. And so that is a habit that we need to always get into. At the City of Calgary, I ask myself, well, we have a new mantra since I've been mayor. It's in every water cooler and every elevator, and it's simply making life better every day. And I ask my colleagues to ask themselves that question multiple times every day. Here I am, hi, multiple times every day. How is what I am doing right now making it easier or better for someone to live here? However, in the last couple of months in working with my colleagues, I've realized our mantra, making life better every day, is incorrect. I made a mistake. And so we've changed it. And it is now making life better every day for everyone. Mm. And that's really, I think, the heart of your point, Naomi. It's easy for us to feel like we're super successful because we're succeeding in our mission. And as nonprofits, that's our only job. We have to be mission driven and we have to succeed in our mission. However, we have to also ask ourselves, how is our mission resonating with everyone? We have a city that is obviously 51% female. We have a city where 1 in 3 people is non-white. And it's important to, oops, I really am having a day. It's important to really think about that for a minute. When I leave this job in the fall, depending on who replaces me, that means that a very large number of rooms where it happens, if you like Hamilton, rooms where decisions are made, will go from having 1 non-white person in the room to having 0 non-white people in the room when I'm gone. And so we really have to ask ourselves, how is the work we're doing serving the community as a whole? How do we make sure we are listening to the voices of the communities we serve, that we are in a position where our decision-making is informed by that, and we have folks around the table? And to me, that's the biggest change that I would suggest we have to make. Because when I talk about my 5 crises, the 5th one, the one of equity, really underpins all of the others, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Because, in the recession, we've seen racialized and vulnerable people very badly hit. This pandemic has hit racialized people much harder than non-racialized people. It's shocking to me. So I live here, finally made it home in Northeast Calgary. Actually, I live in the least diverse neighborhood in the city. It's the least diverse neighborhood in the city because there's no white people here. And most of the folks are South Asian. I'm a minority because I'm the wrong faith, but most of the folks in the neighborhood are South Asian. And, in this spring, when we were really having a lot of trouble with the wave of COVID, the third wave, I heard folks say, I don't know anybody who's had it. And I thought to myself, geez, if you walk down my street here in Coral Springs and rang every doorbell, I guarantee you there is not one family who couldn't tell you about someone close to them who has died of it. And so, and the environmental crisis, as we know, impacts racialized people and people living in poverty in different ways. So ultimately, I think taking that lens, that equity lens on the other four crises is something that really we need to do to make sure that what we're doing to get out of this is something that is both equitable, but also applicable to as many people as possible. Did anyone warn you, Naomi? Because we've never had a Q&A in public like this before, that I'm really, really bad at short answers.
I have seen you do a few Q&As in my time. And I personally really, really like your long answers. I love politics in full sentences. So
I had a journalist say to me recently, listen, we've appreciated politics in full sentences. Why have there so many of them?
No, I'm a language nerd. I'm very good with the long sentences and the long answers. So one question that's coming up in the chat, and certainly a question that's on my mind is, you touched on it. It's an election year. We're coming up from municipal election in October. What advice would you have for the nonprofit sector in the run up to that election?
Oh, I have so many things to say. So it's been a while since I've been a professor of nonprofit management, though I'm forever reminding the university, I'm just on leave. You have to take me back. So I'm a little rusty with the charitable law, which is not usually a thing I get too hung up on, but I do know that there have been changes in how nonprofits can advocate. And I would suggest you fully take advantage of that. This is a critical and pivotal election, not just because I'm leaving, but really because we are going to see a very new council. There are, by minimum, so there's 15 members of council, 8 is a majority. And by math, there will be at least 7 new members of council, just by math, given the number of people who are retiring. Mm-hmm. And in reality, just given the fact that 3 members of council are running for mayor, and a couple others maybe you may not win their election, a couple others maybe should not win their election. There could be as many as 12 to 14 brand new members of city council. And so the council race is critical, not just the mayor's race. And it's going to be absolutely essential that the council candidates understand the value of the nonprofit sector. And I know those of us in the sector are forever having to do the emotional labor of explaining what it is we do and what our value is. That's why we have Karen. But we got to do a lot more of that. Going into this election, we got to make sure now that council candidates really understand the value of the sector. We have to ask pointed questions. So one thing that I've done as mayor in every election, federal and provincial election, is we have a site called Cities Matter. And I get them in writing to make promises on things that are important to us so that I have that to back up after the election. We should do the same. I think Karen has a fancy new mask. I wonder if she'll show it to us while we're here, about the nonprofit vote. And to me, this stuff is critical. And I know CCVO is taking a lead on it, but we got to be really good about it. And sure enough, yes, CCVO should host a mayoral debate, absolutely. But you should also consider having agencies host councillor debates in every ward.
And really, because, you know, a lot of people don't pay attention to the councillor elections, but because so many of them are flipping, and I'll just be blunt with you, there are slates that sometimes are obvious and sometimes are not obvious that are out there doing this work. And at least one of those slates would be deeply injurious to the nonprofit sector. So we got to make people know, and we've got to advocate in a big way. And that's not just about, you know, will you give us money, right? There are some specific things about, will you protect FCSS funding, for example? But I think it's broader than that. And it really is about, what view will the city take in supporting the nonprofit sector? Like, I just heard a candidate up in Ward 2 do like a 45-second video, which was just the most vapid thing I'd ever seen, where she said, City Hall needs to learn to stay in its lane. It has to focus only on the issues that the city is focusing on. I mean, she never gave any examples of what the city is doing that we ought not to be doing. But that's actually pretty dangerous rhetoric, because that means that when we are investing in things like affordable housing, not strictly a city responsibility, folks will say, well, the city ought not to be doing that, or homelessness, or the mental health strategy, which is, by the way, the mental health strategy is not only the single most important thing I've done as a politician, it's probably the single most important thing I've worked on in my life. But they'll just say, well, the city shouldn't be doing that, which leads me to the question, if not us, then who? If we're not convening, if we're not speaking for the community as a whole, then who? Do we just leave it? That's unacceptable to me. And so I think we've got to find the lanes that we want to battle in and move forward. And I'll tell you one other thing. So this is a hint to some folks watching, maybe not everyone will pick it up. There's an entire plan that was developed in the last year, which would allow us to end homelessness in Calgary in the next year. It's an incredibly aggressive housing plan. It is outstanding. And I have not succeeded in implementing it. And it takes, I'm still trying, I got 4 months, so who knows? But it's a relatively modest investment from the provincial and federal governments that will literally end homelessness in a large city in North America. And I am shocked that no mayoral candidate has picked it up and said, this is something that I'm going to find and I'm going to fund. Maybe mayoral candidates are watching today, who knows? But this is really an opportunity for the sector to set the agenda. Because frankly, I've got a little box by the door here, and I put all the election flyers in it. And frankly, any one of these election flyers so far in this race, and it's still very early, but so far in this race, any one of them, I could just switch the picture and it could be someone else's election flyer with the exact same words. And none of the candidates yet have taken bold action. So this is our opportunity as a sector to give them some ideas and to hold their hands a little bit to help them take that bold action. So there's a defensive posture here, making sure people understand the importance of the sector, but there's also an offensive posture at this point in putting the sector's issues on the issues agenda on the ballot.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's the question of leadership, right? As you say, if we don't pick these things up and speak to collectively, who will? And why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we? I'm going to look at some of the questions we're getting in coming from the chat. So I got a couple of systems questions for you.
Oh, I love systems questions.
So
I might need a whiteboard.
Oh, yes, please. Looking other places in the world, have you come across systems, cities, countries that are producing stronger social systems, stronger social outcomes? You know, places, for example, that have worked themselves out of homelessness, out of poverty, out of domestic violence, those kinds of things. Where do you look to for that kind of inspiration and sort of examples of leadership?
You know, I try not to look to any one particular place or even any one particular policy, because I really think that our role is to build the Calgary solution, right? So we kind of look around the world and we pick and choose. You know, Iceland has a really interesting model, for example, on preventing teens from falling into addiction. You know, the city of Portland has some interestingly, everyone talks about the city of Portland and their mental health first response and how they divert people away from the police system. And when you hear them describe this world-leading program, you know what it is? It's the dope team. It's what Alpha House has been doing for many years. In fact, it's what the dope team was when it started, not what it has evolved into, which is even better. So at some point, let's just be proud of ourselves, right? Like, so for example, the mental health strategy is world leading, you know, and my goal there, I said to the folks when they started it, I told them the same story about how I only have two solutions, the systems approach and put the citizen at the middle. And I also further mentioned to them all that my goal for that work was that 2 years later, so a year from now, I wanted people around the world to say, you know what, we should adopt the Calgary model. The Calgary model is the way to go. The only problem is I had no idea what the Calgary model would be. And so our job was to build that. And so our mental health work, I really do think, takes the best work in the world and brings it together. And listen, I'm not above a little bit of bragging. Now, I never take credit for anything, but now that I'm at the end of my term, you know, why not? But I won't take the credit. The team will take the credit. We actually, when I was a nonprofit professor, the most influential journal in the field, which is very readable, and in fact, you all should subscribe to it, is the Stanford Journal of Social Innovation. And I used to use case studies from that in my classes all the time. And I was pretty excited to see that we had a lead story in the Stanford Journal of Social Innovation on how Calgary developed its mental health strategy using a system of cross-sector collaboration. And Nancy Close in my office, who has been with me since day one, who is extraordinary, led this group to Harvard to do all this work. And man, oh man, the best part of that was that journal article was published before we finished the strategy, because it was based on the process we got to get there, and they knew that the strategy was going to be extraordinary coming out of it. And although I had very little to do with that, I'm just so proud of what we've been able to do to come together. Now, there's things we need to do better, right? We need, and a lot of that is, a lot of this one is in the mental health strategy. Of course, we need a better system of handling addiction in our community, from harm reduction through to treatment and recovery. And that requires a lot of giving up a lot of turf, right? Because you might remember, those of you who've been around since the beginning, is I said some provocative things at the beginning of the anti-poverty strategy back in 2010, 2011. And what I said then was, you know, every one of you has extraordinary stories of amazing things you've done to lift people and families out of poverty. But the rate of poverty in our community hasn't changed. In fact, child poverty had gone up. Now it's gone down thanks to big policy changes. But so whatever we're doing is wrong. Even though every one of us in our own agencies, in our own communities, have done amazing things and are super proud of ourselves, it's not working. So we have to give up turf and figure out better ways to do things. So, you know, the child tax benefits at the provincial and federal levels cut child poverty in half. That we never brag about that. That is extraordinary. And that was a stroke of the pen kind of thing to do. Yes, we need to focus on universal basic income. And yes, I hope that our experiment with CERB during the COVID crisis will give us another wind in our sails to do that. So we do have a lot of policy things that we haven't done yet. You know, we are, as Don Iveson, the mayor of Edmonton, always says, now in the 15th year of the 10-year plan to end homelessness. So not everything works, but that doesn't take away our need to recommit to getting the work done, but also to being proud of what we've accomplished so far.
Yeah, I think well, you should be very proud of it. It's certainly something that makes me very proud to be in Calgary. The human piece of it is, you know, putting the sort of the citizen at the heart of the strategy really comes through. One of the questions we've got is about, sort of connects to that in the sense of neighborliness and human relationships. The question reads, one of the things you brought to the table really is that sense of neighborliness and the importance of knowing the people in our communities. And this person notes that this seems to have shifted a little bit in the past few years to a more individual sentiment or feeling. And so how can we amplify, foster, bring back that real sense of real relationships and neighborliness?
It's kind of It's a bit of both now, isn't it? Because over the last several years, it's absolutely true that the discourse in our community, I often say online and inline at the Tim Hortons, has become a lot more divisive, and a lot more mean-spirited. But at the same time, we've seen incredible acts of neighborliness. I like that word. And I'm sad that we haven't had a normal Neighbor Day for 2 years, which, let me just open a bracket. I never thought that would be an important legacy, but it may be the only thing that will still be going on decades from now after we are all in rocking chairs, or long gone. Because, after the flood, right, in 2013, a year later, I was asked, how should we commemorate the anniversary of the flood? And I said, well, this is how we should celebrate it. And I remember a bunch of people rolling their eyes at me and said, did you just say celebrate? Why would we celebrate such a terrible thing? And I said, well, I want to celebrate the extraordinary community resilience and how people looked after one another. And so here's a secret. It's not really a secret. I've said it before, but Neighbor Day was never supposed to be Neighbor Day. I just happen to love block parties. I think block parties are the funnest thing you can do to meet your neighbors, close the road and have a barbecue on the street. And so for a year or two, I had been thinking we should have a citywide block party day where we just close down every street and everybody has a block party. And suddenly it was, again, the extraordinary Nancy Close who resurrected that idea for me when we were talking after the flood, along with Franca Galtieri, I'm surrounded by amazing women who do amazing things, my chief of staff, everybody. But, and so we resurrected it. But the people at the city, the communication superstars at the city went, let's call it Neighbor Day. And I went, that is the cheesiest thing I have ever heard. I want to call it Block Party Day. But as always, the women prevailed over me. And so we ended up calling it Neighbor Day. And it turned out to be this incredibly special thing. So let me tell you two quick things about that. The first is the first sentence of the anti-poverty strategy, Enough for All. The first sentence is, my neighbor's strength is my strength. And if you think about that, and if that's true, if my neighbor's strength is my strength, if my neighbor's success is my success, if every one of us has a stake in every other one of us, that means that the corollary is also true, that my neighbor's failure is my failure. And so to answer the question, to begin to answer the question, that's the first step, is to remind people that we might not all be in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. And so we are indeed in it together. But I want to remind you of the very first Neighbor Day. I think it was the second event at the very first Neighbor Day. I was in a neighborhood in north central Calgary, Highland Park or Tuxedo, one of those. And they had just done a very simple Neighbor Day event, which is they had coffee and Timbits at their community center in the morning. And they had a big whiteboard. And the big whiteboard was split in two. And on one side, it said, I have. And on the other side, it said, I need. And the idea was you're supposed to write what you wanted to do on Neighbor Day, and someone else is supposed to write what they would like you to do on Neighbor Day. And someone had written, and it was obviously an older person, an older woman's handwriting. She had written, I need someone to fix my lawnmower. And I know some of you have heard this story, but it gets me every time. And so she was there. The lady was there, the older lady. So I asked her, tell me about your lawnmower. I don't know how to fix a lawnmower, but I know how to ask people questions. And so I asked her, tell me about your lawnmower. And she said, well, my husband passed this winter and he always mowed the lawn. And so now I have to learn how to mow the lawn, but the lawnmower is broken and I don't know how to fix it. And of course, someone had written on the other side, I'm coming over to mow your lawn. And that simple act of neighborliness changed that woman's life. And so when we come back to thinking about what we can do, I'm going to give you a secret, one of my retirement plans that maybe some of you can help me with. We launched a program very early in my time as mayor, again, the extraordinary Nancy Close and the beautiful late Sherry McCauley, launched this plan called Three Things for Calgary. And for Canada's sesquicentennial in 2017, we turned it into Three Things for Canada. And it's the simplest thing in the world. It's simply reaching out to every citizen and saying, every year, do at least 3 acts of community service. So in my retirement, I'm taking the giant foam 3s with me. And maybe Nancy, if she'll come. And I'm going to resurrect and amplify that and continue to encourage people to do those simple acts of community service. By the way, I should point out to you that that's not just a cheesy, sweet thing. It's actually based on a lot of hard-nosed research. So when I was an academic, I knew that the number one reason that people don't volunteer, it's consistent year after year in all the literature. And it's not, I don't have time. It's not, I don't have money. It's not, I don't have passion for anything. The number one reason people don't volunteer is nobody asked me.
Mhm.
So Three Things for Canada is just about asking. It's about making the ask. It's about saying, Marion Wright Edelman famously said, service is the rent we pay for being human. And so it's about asking people to do service, to do seva, as I always say in South Asian languages. So it's making the ask. And there's a reason it's 3 things, by the way, because very pop psychology literature will say to you, you got to do something at least 3 times to make it a habit. And of course, it's not about doing 3 acts of community service. It's about creating lifetime habits of community service. And so ultimately, that is the goal here. By the way, when they adopted it in Toronto, they turned it into 2 for Toronto. And I called and I was like, no, it has to be 3. There's a reason it's 3. Why'd you pick 2? And they were like, oh, it just sounds better. But in any case, so those are the sorts of things we can do to start building up neighborliness. And if I can get a little bit emotional about it, look, we live in a time of mean-spiritedness. We live in a time of anger and division and greed and self-centeredness. I don't know why. I think partly it's because people feel vulnerable and threatened that they're going to lose things that are important to them.
Mhm.
I think partly it's because politicians have been irresponsible and they've been catering to that kind of divisive spirit. But I know that that's not what people here have in their hearts. I'll give you a piece of empirical evidence. Anytime I post anything about COVID on any social media platform these days, the anger and the bile and the anti-vax and the anti-mask and all of that comes out like you wouldn't believe. It's the vast majority of what comes out. Yet we have the highest vaccination rates in the world here in Calgary. And so that tells me that the people who are screaming and yelling full of anger and division and hatred are not the people. And that's something we've got to always remember. And you've heard me say this since 2017. If there's one thing I know deep in my heart to be true, is that in this place, we will never allow division and anger and hatred to win. That kindness and compassion and empathy and mercy and love will always win. But it just doesn't happen. It happens because we make it happen. And so a lot of people have been asking me lately, what can I do in my own life to combat racism? What can I do in my own life to build reconciliation? Because those are big, hairy problems. They're systemic problems. They're institutional problems. What can I do? And I always say, look, there's tons that we can do. And I've tried to be very forward thinking. When we had that terrible situation in Kamloops, I sat down on a Sunday afternoon and wrote out a bit of a treatise that I split up into tweet sizes on what can we do. So number one, we can examine our own attitudes. We can ask ourselves hard questions about what we do that inadvertently fosters this kind of thing in our own hearts and minds. Number two, we can educate ourselves. You know what the best, we've had a big conversation about canceling Canada Day. I have an opinion on that. I think we should definitely need to go forward, but in a somber way. And I can talk about that if people have questions. But you know one thing to do this Canada Day? Sign up for the Indigenous Canada course offered by the University of Alberta. It's free. And pledge to educate yourself. Teach your kids. I've tweeted links to tons of resources on reconciliation and on anti-racism that are appropriate for children. Fight casual racism wherever you see it. Find the voice to say, guys, that's not appropriate. Guys, that's not right. Do that in your daily life, online and in real life. Refuse to support politicians who explicitly or implicitly condone this work. Get loud. Get loud. One of the things to get loud about, by the way, is the Alberta proposed social studies curriculum. Get loud about it and say it's not acceptable. It is absolutely not acceptable to have a curriculum that takes a 1950s National Geographic view of diversity, saying those people have come here and we welcome those people. I mean, that sounds nice, right? But that's not the reality that the young people live in, that they need to be educated about. And ultimately, politicians just do what people want them to do. They're being divisive and angry, not because they themselves are racists or bigots, at least I hope not. There probably some of them are. But they're doing it because it works, because people vote for them. And so refuse to vote for them. You know, as I've been saying, you know, I got in trouble with some people who legitimately don't like masks for saying, you know, that the anti-mask protests are a front for white supremacy. And they're like, I'm not a white supremacist. And I'm like, I never called you a white supremacist. What I'm telling you is that when you show up at a rally that is led by people in neo-Nazi paraphernalia holding torches, then you are complicit. You are actually complicit in that behavior. So stop doing that. And so ultimately, these are the sorts of things that every one of us need to take on. And I got to tell you, like Dr. Glassberg, can we get to a time of transcendence, or will it get to a time of torpor? That's up to us. It's up to every one of us to take those kinds of actions and to elect people who will continue to take those actions. So that's a really long answer to a very complicated question.
It's a great answer, though. In a moment of shameless promotion for the fort, we have a lot of resources, and we're building more. But on blog post on reconciliation, sort of unpacking things for people, a great audio tour of this site, and for Canada Day this year, we're really excited to launch a self-guided audio experience of the national anthem, inviting people to reflect on how it acts as a tool of nation building. And
that's so cool.
What does that mean? And so there's a listening portion that you listen to by yourself in advance, and then Tyler Stewart, who created it, is going to be online live with Tobias Provost talking about it on Canada Day. So, you know, we're trying to invite people into that reflection as opposed to celebration that's perhaps fun, but maybe not as thoughtful as it could be.
Well, you know, unless people want me to get into it, I don't want to too much get into it. I'm happy to do it if people want, but I'm sure there's other questions. I just want to say, you know, there's a big question about what do we do on Canada Day? And I right after this, I've got a meeting. I just announced it yesterday, but given today's news, we've got a conversation right after this meeting. But my sense is exactly as you say, if we cancel it, you know, that doesn't really mean that people are going to take the moment to do the reflection. And it also means that for some people, they'll be saying, oh, so what reconciliation means is that I have to give up these things that are important to me and my family. And we run a very real risk of losing the moment where people have this issue close in their hearts. And so I agree with you. I actually do want people to celebrate on Canada Day. We've had a rough year, and I want people to see those fireworks and commit themselves to further action. But I also think we can take that moment while we have people's attention to really start talking about what does the future Canada look like? What does the promise of Canada look like? And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing at the fort, which is unsurprising because you're awesome, but that's great.
Well, we have a wonderful team with some very thoughtful, smart people around. I want to come back to the concept of neighborliness and the idea that sort of, you know, my strength is your strength and my struggle is your struggle in a systems kind of way when we think about nonprofits. So, you know, smaller grassroots organizations impact sometimes goes unnoticed.
Mhm.
So how would you encourage the larger nonprofits or agencies to mentor and share with grassroots organizations? So in a sense, how can that success of the small and be linked with the success of the large?
What a great question. So, you know, it's a cultural shift, right? So if you look at the tech sector or the startup community, you will see that they actually take pride when their engineers go off and start a new startup. And often the larger companies will be the first customers for the smaller companies. And we don't often do that. We don't do that at all in the public sector. So that's something I've been pushing the city of Calgary for many years to do. And we're taking baby steps, but really have been saying, you know, we should be the first customer for new entrepreneurs. We're so risk averse. We're like, show us your reference list of your 37 clients that you've already had before we'll even consider you.
Yep.
So we're taking baby steps in that. But I got to tell you, we're a little like that in the sector too. You know, we see folks who start new things as competition, or maybe we're a little turfy. I don't know. Anyone in the nonprofit sector feel like sometimes we're a little turfy?
No.
Yeah, we're a little turfy. And because we're fighting for the same dollars, we're fighting for the same grants. Oh my God, I can't believe you would go out and do this on your own when I have this program that does 90% of what you do anyway. And so we've got to figure out a bit of a cultural shift here of how we welcome diversity and welcome new innovative ideas. And yeah, maybe you're doing 90% of what I'm doing, but I'm really interested in that other 10%. And we figure out ways to partner. You know, one thing that I always think is crazy is when politicians say, oh, there's too much duplication of services in the sector. And I think to myself, would you say that to Pepsi? Coke makes exactly what you make. You should go away. Right? In the free market, we actually believe in competition because we think it makes everyone better. But in the nonprofit sector, sometimes we have to create that. Can I be super academic just for a minute?
Go for it. I will like it. Nobody else does.
Lecture 5, capstone course, nonprofit studies 4405. The reason that the free market works well is because of what the economist Schumpeter calls creative destruction. So people are exiting and entering all the time. And so new ideas win in the marketplace of ideas. One of the challenges we have in the nonprofit sector is nobody ever goes bankrupt. There's always one more grant you can chase. There's always, I just won't take my salary this month, or I'm going to convert these jobs to volunteer jobs. And so because it's harder to have exit in the sector, it also means it's harder to have entry in the sector. And so we run as a sector the risk of stagnating, of just doing the same thing all the time. I'm sure none of you have ever heard in your organizations, but that's not how we do it. And I'm sure none of you have ever heard in your organizations, oh, we tried that in 1997 and it didn't work.
No, I'm never. No.
Never, right? Never. And so ultimately, part of how we do this is exactly what the questioner is asking, is how do we do this within the context of those smaller organizations and getting those smaller organizations engaged and excited in the work they're doing and learning from them. Mm-hmm. And yeah, maybe you merge sometimes. And I'm always happy when I see mergers in the sector, which is uncommon and usually driven by funders. But I'm happy when I see those kinds of transition points, because I believe that in the sector, every organization is always at an inflection point. And figuring out how to manage those inflections is really critical. So there you go. So if I don't go back to the university, I will be selling my CD course, Strategic Management in the Nonprofit Sector, only $100 for 5 CDs. And you can hire me to come and speak to your nonprofit for a low rate. Or maybe I won't do that and just keep talking for free, but hopefully there's some insight there.
Well, you know, I started my career out of the University of Waterloo in tech startups. And I have taken the tech startup attitude through every museum I've worked in, and it has only ever served us well. It's
Very cool.
it's a useful lens to bring to the work. We only have a few minutes left before I need to turn it back over to Karen, and we have had some really some nice comments come in.
Okay.
So I wanted to just give you a couple of those. Just, a comment, we're really going to miss Nahed's optimism, love for his city, and positive reflections on who we are as Calgarians. I sure hope we can elect representatives who have the same passion for us as a city. Over your time as mayor, I've had the opportunity to work in seniors, disabilities, and homeless sectors. We've been so fortunate to see gains. I want to thank you for all your work. So I wanted to make sure you heard those as well as the tougher questions.
Thanks. So I'm happy, Naomi, I'm happy to go into light. That's very sweet. That's very kind. But we do have a couple of minutes left. So if you want me to do a quick lightning round and answer some questions in under 30 seconds, I can do it.
Okay. Do we have any questions on the chat for the mayor? The under 30-second answers? How about this one? We organize our marketplace. We've touched on the marketplace a little bit, and act through a system of partnerships and collaboration, always working to join up disjointed systems. Are there better ways to tackle social problems in our society?
No, I think that's exactly right, but I don't think we always do it. And so very quickly in the mental health strategy, there's 3 sections to it: staying safe, getting help when and if you need it, and being well. I said them backwards. So it's being well is the prevention piece, getting help where and when you need it, and staying safe. But the interesting thing is that middle one, getting help. The challenge was when we talked about it, the most common thing everyone said is, oh, we already have all the services that people need. It's just a matter of access and system navigation. We just have to map it, and then people will get whatever they need. And I pushed hard saying, do we really have what people need? Or do we think we have what people need? So the questioner, you're exactly right. That is the definition of a systems view. I would argue we don't do it as much as we should.
Great. Karen, we have time for one more question, or should I keep going, or do I need to hand it back to you now?
I think you need to hand it back to me, but Mayor Nenshi, if you have a wrap-up comment, I'll cede the floor.
Well, listen, you've heard a lot from me. I'm happy I made it home and I could actually see some of you on the screen. I just want to say thank you. At moments like this, it's easy to become discouraged. It's easy to become frustrated. It's easy to want to put your fist through the screen. There are certain politicians who shall remain unnamed who give me that instinct fairly often. But ultimately, like I said before, those aren't the people. The people are the people that we deal with every single day. And so this is probably maybe going to be my last time to be able to speak with all of you in this kind of format as the mayor. Hell, I'll do one more in October if you want, but you'll be busy in real life, but you'll be busy with the election, but I'll put it out there.
We'll host it.
We can go to Fort Calgary and let's do that. Let's do that. But I'll be modeling anyway. Let's do that because I'll be able to get back together without masks hopefully by then. But I'll be modeling anyway. For the last 11 years, it has been an incredibly humbling honor for me, for a working class kid from Northeast Calgary, to have the trust of people who say that we're going to put our hopes and our dreams and our fears for the city in your hands, even just for a second. And I wake up every single day and put on my pants and go to work. Sometimes work is across my bedroom to my home office these days. Understanding that, hopefully understanding that. And my only wish is that I've been able to do that I've been able to hold people's desires for the place they live, the things they love, the things they hold dear in my hands for a minute. And I've been incredibly lucky to be the voice. Sometimes I have the idea. Sometimes I help implement the idea, but usually I just shine a light on things. And when I was making the decision of whether or not to run, again, it was a really hard decision. And I kept asking myself, is it irresponsible for me? Is it wrong for me to walk away at this pivotal moment? And have I fulfilled that promise that I made to my mom and dad, add to the community when I started this, which was just leave it better than you found it. And it doesn't feel a lot better right this second. But my sister reminded me of what I said at the very beginning of my speech on that sweaty October night in that overcrowded basement in 2010, the night of the election. She reminded me that I started by saying, today, Calgary is a different place than it was yesterday. It's a better place. And it's not because of me. It's because of you. It's because of all of you. And so ultimately, I say to all of you today that the work you do every single day, using your brains and your hearts and your hands, and these days, especially your voices, makes a difference every day. And there is nowhere in the world that I would rather be having these conversations than right here. And it's because of you. And I'm deeply grateful that I get to live in a city with all of you in it. So thank you for what you do.
Well, with that, I am going to come in and say, I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you, Mayor Nenshi. You are going to be so dearly missed, but I don't think you're going to be missed for long. I know that in our nonprofit sector, we're going to cross your path often. And if we don't, I'm inviting you to my block party on Neighbor Day next year. I hope you'll come.
I probably won't have 125 invitations, so I'll take you up on it. I grill a good hot dog.
You're getting one for sure. Thanks, Naomi, for really engaging conversation. I have just a tiny bit of housekeeping, which is Mayor Nenshi, you talked about the nonprofit vote. Yes, CCBO is launching the nonprofit vote in September. It will be a home for sector-wide advocacy, and it will have on it a Calgary municipal campaign, Get Out to Vote campaign, with information about what's important to the sector and candidates. So sign up for a newsletter if you're not already a member to get more information about that. And we invite you to download our recently hot off the press Blueprint for Community Recovery, Community Prosperity Now. It's a report that talks about what the private sector, nonprofit sector, and all orders of government can be doing to ensure that community is centered in our recovery here in Alberta. Please download it, read it, and share it with your board members and your stakeholders. So thank you again to our presenting sponsor, ATB Financial, and to our supporters, Muttart Foundation, PwC Canada, and our media partner, Postmedia. Thank you to everyone who attended today and to the CCBO team in the background, Marissa Barber, Mary Polychronis, and Marok Yoshifashi. Thank you for all your work today. Please take a moment to complete our survey. Any other loving comments you want to pass to the mayor, you can do so, and we will make sure he gets them. But I know his door is open between now and the next municipal election. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you all soon.